friends, Krista here. Thank you so much for stopping by Books and Jams. I'm here today to tell you about all the books that I've read so far in the month of March. We are almost halfway through the month. Currently today it is the 12th, and I am on track for reading a book a day. I have 12 books to share with you today. So I needed to split this up because if I continue on this path, having 31 books to talk to you about at the end of the month is simply too many. We need to talk about some books. So I am here today to talk about the first 12 books that I read in the month of March. I'm going to start with my two books that are not middle grade. The first non-middle grade book that I completed was one of my NetGalley reads, and it is The FixerUpper by Lauren Forsyth. I had started this towards the end of February and finished it in March. And this is kind of a workplace rom-com. We follow Allie and two of her friends, and they are kind of starting up a new business, and they're calling it The FixerUpper, sort of like a side business. The two friends approach Allie and let her know that she kind of has a trend in her relationships where she takes the guy she's dating, fixes him up, and then they end up breaking up and he moves on to a better job, a better house, moves on to bigger and better things because of the ways that she helped him. And so they're like, why don't we turn this into a business? You could do this for women, help guys to move on and move better, like decide better for themselves. Things do not go as planned, obviously. I really loved the friendship in this book. I thought the two friends called Allie out on some things, and they had some hard discussions, which I really appreciated. At one point in their business, they get approached by this mega Instagram influencer who is dating Allie's first love, her friend, her best friend from high school. She always kind of loved him, but things never developed into a relationship. Now she's supposed to fix him up, but she thinks he's kind of perfect. And how does that all play out? So I did love this kind of second chance romance, if you will. I don't love the miscommunication trope, and that was in here, even though it did feel more realistic than sometimes. Sometimes it feels very obvious, like just sit down and have a conversation. This one did feel a little bit realistic. It's still not my favorite trope by any means. But I did not love that there was some cursing in here because I just didn't feel like it was necessary. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It was a fun read. It was light. It was fluff. It was kind of what I was needing towards the end of February as we moved into March, and I'm glad that I finished another NetGalley. I'm at 49%. I'm so close to 50. We're getting up to 70 by the end of the year. That is the plan. The other non-middle grade book that I read is the one that I spun my wheel for. So I have a wheel of 12 books that I'm trying to read by the end of the year. I spun the wheel, and in March it gave me The Serpent King by Jeff Zettner. This is a YA kind of coming of age story. 3 friends who live in a small town in Tennessee. One of them is well off. Her father's a successful doctor. She wants to get out of town. She herself is a budding influencer on Instagram. She's ready to get out of this town, wants to go to college and just move on with her life. The boys, on the other hand, that she's friends with don't have the same privileges that she has, if you will. Both of them come from some difficult situations. One of them, Dill, one of them is named Dill, and he is the son of a snake handling preacher who got caught with some kitty pictures and is sent to jail. And he had to testify against his dad. So really some difficult situations there. And then Travis was the other one, who's 6'6" tall, staff wielding boy who loves his fantasy books and sometimes wishes that he could live in the fantasy rather than in real life. He's a cinnamon roll of a character. I just absolutely loved Travis. These three are definitely not in the popular crowd. They are a little bit outcast, get bullied a bit from the rest of the kids in school, but they have a very strong bond of friendship that I love. And yet they all still kind of hold things from each other and are dealing with some heavy stuff. I really loved the friendships. I really was wrecked at one point reading this. It totally broke me. Like sobbing tears, not just, oh, that's so sad, but I was wrecked with sobs at one point. But I did really love this book. I listened to it on audio and I almost wish that I read it in print because every once in a while there would be a quote that was just so good and it would make me pause for a minute and reflect on what Jeff Zettner just said, the way that he worded things. And I don't have any of that marked because I listened to it on audio all in one day. I flew through this because I just could not stop. Reading as a person of faith, I obviously did not love how Christianity was portrayed, but it was definitely an extreme kind of niche pocket of Christianity that occasionally would get talked about as if it were all Christians this way. It's definitely not all Christians, because I was furious sometimes with some of the things the adults would say in here. And it was adults who were professing Christians and just sometimes just spouting Bible verses in ways that was not kind or profitable or correct, and out of context, and just the ways that some behaviors were being excused and the way blame was being put on other people. It just was infuriating. And in the majority of my anger was focused towards some of the people who claim to be Christians in here. I'm like, that is not the Jesus that I follow. So that was really frustrating, but I think it was meant to be frustrating. And I think how I was feeling, these kids were feeling as well. And so I do think that was kind of brilliant at the same time, like just really well done. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. I really, really enjoyed this. So good. So glad though to also get another book off of that kind of long-standing TBR pile. I guess let's do some poetry books next. Well, I did have one graphic novel that I read just yesterday, Garlic and the Vampire. This was adorable, by Bree Paulson. I really thought this was a sweet little story. We have these garden vegetables who work with this witch, and they tend the garden and go to market. And then up on a hill, they see smoke coming out of this castle, and they think that a vampire lives there. And so Garlic gets nominated to be the one to go and find out if there is a vampire in this castle, because, Garlic wards off vampires, right? So Garlic herself is a very afraid, nervous Nellie. She's petrified to do this, but she kind of puts on her big girl pants and decides to do this for the good of everybody, and goes up to the castle to see if there's a vampire there. Bless her little heart. I thought it was sweet and just a quick little story. You can see the artwork is just really cool. I really enjoyed this, and I do have the second one, Garlic and the Witch, checked out from the library, so I will be reading the second one this month as well. Next, we'll do a little bit of poetry. So I did read this duo by Sharon Creech. Love That Dog is the first one, and then Hate That Cat is the second one. And these were fantastic books of poetry, and I just wasn't prepared for how much I enjoyed these. These books are kind of written in almost like a journal type of way, in that each poem has a date at the top. And we have a kid, maybe 5th grade, 6th grade kid, writing almost to his teacher. Some of these poems are addressed to the teacher, or like say, you can do this or you can do that, in response to the poetry that she reads in class, or just different things that happen in class. But every one is a poem. And I was not prepared to have a tear in my eye about a poem about a dog. If you know me, you know I'm not particularly an animal person, but it was amazing to me how well I got to know, I think his name is Jack, and his teacher is Miss Stretchberry. And I just really got to know him through these poems. And it was very cool. We got introduced to other poets, and he writes sometimes inspired by different poets that the teacher is talking to them about. I mean, it's a great tool for teaching poetry, because it talks about alliteration and onomatopoeia and different styles and forms of poetry. Lovely, lovely, lovely little books. I'm so glad that I own them and that they are going to be on my shelves, because I can see myself reading these again. They're so sweet. Fabulous little books of poetry. Still on the poetry train, I have 2 books I read that were written in verse. And the first of those is Alone by Megan Freeman. I did listen to this on audio. It is a quick listen because it is all written in verse. I read this for my sci-fi dystopian apocalyptic prompt, and it technically fits that, but I do think it's really more of a survival story. In this, we follow a young girl who kind of sneaks out, planning to have a little sleepover with her friends at her grandmother's house. But the friends aren't able to come, so she stays by herself, because now she's told her parents she's off doing something else. She can't really go home. She's from a split family home, like spends some time at her dad's and some time at her mom's. We get to learn a little bit about that at the beginning, but then when she wakes up in the morning, everybody is gone. Everybody has been evacuated, and because she was trying to be Sneaky Pete, she gets left behind and has to survive for years. So we learn a lot about how she's creative and inventive and figures out ways to survive. Getting food from people's houses. She finds this kind of stranded dog that becomes her companion during this time. And just kind of the thought process and all of the growing up that she does during this time period. I thought that was interesting and it was good. However, I wanted to know more about this world. Why was everyone evacuated? What kind of a world are we living in that all of a sudden the whole West Coast has to be evacuated? That takes place in Seattle, I believe, or just outside of Seattle. Like, what's going on? We know nothing except that everyone had to go and they were gone. The news lasted for another hour or two afterwards, and then there was no news. There was nothing that told us about the world and what happened. And I just wanted more of that part of the story. I thought the survival part was good, but I just wanted more of the setting. How did we get here? I don't know. It never told me. So I did only give this one 3 stars. I was a little bit bummed about that, but it was still an interesting story. The other book and verse that I read, however, I just loved, and that's Otter by Katherine Applegate. And I know now that not everyone loves this. I've heard a couple other people, looking at you, Gloria and Mitzi, who didn't really care for this one, and that is fine. It is a simple story about this otter who lives off the west coast of California. When he is a baby, gets connected with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and we learn about how they had to teach him how to swim and how to dive and how to play. And then he's released to the wild, and how does that go for him? As well as an otter friend that he makes, and just his connection to this aquarium. And I thought it was lovely. It was a delightful little story, super sweet. Not a lot happens, but I did feel like it had a lot of heart. And by the end, I was tearing up, definitely not sobbing like the Serpent King, but I definitely teared up a little bit towards the end. I thought it was just super cute. I mean, a huge plug for this book is simply the adorable illustrations throughout. I did read this in print. I did not listen to this one. I do typically like to listen to books in verse, but because of the illustrations that are all interspersed in here, I just wanted to read it in print and just dive into this little world of Otter. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was super sweet. It's my favorite of the month so far. I do believe, oh, you know what? I don't think, it was my favorite of the month until one that I read recently, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But I do really, really love this one. Then we'll do a bit of historical, and then we'll end with fantasy, because my favorite was the fantasy. So I have 4 books that I read that are historical fiction. And I read 2 books so far in the Gaither Sisters trilogy by Rita Williams Garcia. So I read One Crazy Summer and P.S. B11. In One Crazy Summer, we follow these 3 sisters who are sent on a plane off to the West Coast to meet their mother, really, who they haven't seen in years and years, Cece. Their mother kind of left them when the youngest one was still just a baby. And these 3 girls go and spend the summer with her. And we get to learn a lot about the beginnings of the Black Panther movement. I think it happens in 1968. So they are kind of left to fend for themselves. The mother is a poet, and she's kind of not a warm and fuzzy type of person at all. I just really loved these 3 sisters and their interactions with each other. They had a lot of spunky attitude, and I just loved them so much. And I liked the little bits that we got to learn about 1968 in Oakland, California, right before the riots happened. So there was talk towards the end of this book about an event that was going to happen in this park, and the girls were like, nah, we're not going to go. Yeah, you just kind of, you can feel the tension, the racial tension in that part of the, in that city while the girls were there, and the things that they were learning there, which were so different from their home in Brooklyn on the East Coast. So it just was very interesting. I loved the girls so much. And then I dove right into the second one, PSB 11. Yeah, so they come back home. This is when they've arrived back in Brooklyn, and now they are back in school. The summer is over, and they have found a new level of independence because of their summer with their mother and the Black Panthers in California. And Big Mama lives with them and their dad, and Big Mama is not one for their independence. She's not having any of it. But these three girls have to kind of navigate this newfound voices that they found, but also this new relationship with their mom and writing her letters. And then their dad, who is introducing a new woman into their lives and potentially getting married to her. And then back in school, and we kind of see some school scenes. Delphine is the oldest, and she finds out the teacher that she was really looking forward to having in 6th grade is on an exchange program. And instead she has Mr. Mwila, an exchange teacher from Zambia. So things are not quite the same at school. It just kind of carries on. It's just kind of day-to-day life. But really the highlight of these books is this relationship between the sisters and the things that they're learning and how they communicate with each other and with their family, and being a young Black girl in the 1960s. I loved it. And I'm very excited to read the 3rd book before the end of the month, hopefully. Another historical book that I read is called Letters from the Lighthouse by Emma Carroll. I really loved this one. I was nervous at first because I thought it was going to be a little too similar to A Place to Hang the Moon or The War That Saved My Life, because it also takes place during the time when children were sent out of London to live in the countryside. However, where it differs from the other two is that A Place to Hang the Moon and The War That Saved My Life is very much focused on the kids, like specific children, and their story of moving to the countryside and how they are coping with that situation and different parts of their personal lives. This one is a lot more focused on the actual war, on World War II. These brother and sister go to Devon. They're right at the beginning. They kind of sneak out, or I forget what, they were going with their sister to the movies, and a bomb hits, and they are kind of rushed quickly out to the countryside shortly after that because it's just getting too dangerous in London. So they go to Devon, the Devonshire coast, to stay with and end up staying with a mysterious lighthouse keeper. While they are there in Devon, Olive, who's our main character, she has a mystery of her own to solve. She has a note that is from her sister that seems to be written in code, and she's trying to figure out what happens. There's a boat of Jewish refugees at one point, and how does the town respond to that, and what is their involvement in that or lack of involvement? All of these things are very much a part of the story. Definitely very focused more on the war than the other ones. So I did really love this. My other main thing that I really liked about this is that at one point, Olive, who's this middle sister, I loved her. She's fierce, she's strong, she's super smart, and she loves her family so intensely. She is determined to find out what happened to her sister, and she takes care of her little brother. But at one point, she gets corrected about something by an adult, one of the other children who were also sent out from London, evacuated from London. She and this girl don't get along very well. An adult kind of challenges her on her behavior and the way that she thinks about this other girl. And I love that Olive takes that information, reflects on it, and changes her behavior because of it. I love that so much. She recognizes that what she was doing or saying was wrong, receives that correction, and then changes her behavior or changes her perspective. I thought that was fabulous. I think that needs to be reflected more in books, instead of kids being so entitled and holding so tightly to their own behaviors and the way that they think. To see a girl receive some correction or just a change of perspective, receive it and change because of it. I loved it so much, and I wish there were more of that. I loved this book. So good. And the last historical book that I read is A Night Divided by Jennifer A. Nielsen. This one takes place right in Berlin, right after the war, when the Berlin Wall went up. And we follow a family who the father and son had left to go do something. The wall went up, and now they're trapped on opposite sides of the wall. The mother and two of the siblings on one side, on the east side, communist side, and then the dad and another son on the west side. And how does this family deal with that? Are they able to get reconnected again? I just thought this was super interesting because I don't think I've read anything about the Berlin Wall before, and how quickly it went up and how drastically different East and West Berlin were. It just was very, very interesting to read about. I really enjoyed this one as well. And finally, I have 2 fantasy books that I just recently read. Solimar, The Sword of the Monarchs is by Pam Munoz Ryan. This is kind of a Mexican influenced fantasy world. And Solimar is the princess in this family. Her father is the king. And one day, and in her kingdom, they have a huge respect for and have this wood forest right outside of their lands where the monarch butterflies come and dwell there. And this kingdom has a huge respect for the monarchs. One day, when the migration is happening of monarchs, Solimar, instead of sitting on the side of the creek that is safe with her abuela, she gets there early, crosses the creek, which is not supposed to happen, and sits right kind of in this clearing in the forest and is as the butterflies are coming, and she hears this magical music and is gifted with this special ability for a short period of time that causes her a lot of grief and has a lot of responsibility attached to it. Meanwhile, she also just has some ideas about the politics of her kingdom, and Solimar doesn't really have an option to be a part of politics because of the way things are. But then she learns about kind of a coup that's about to happen and has to go and warn the dad and the brother. And there's this big adventure of rafting down the river, and she meets a friend who helps her do that. It's a bit of an adventure. It's a short little book, but a lot happens in here. And I thought it was lovely. I love Pam Munoz-Ryan, and I really enjoyed this book. There's a bird that doesn't talk, but is very smart. A talking doll. There's a little bit of magic, a little bit of fantasy, a lot of friendship and family love, and a young girl who wants to have a voice in her kingdom and has some great ideas. So I really enjoyed that one. But my favorite book so far this month was definitely Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. I shouldn't be surprised. So many people have loved this book, and I did as well. It's a fantasy where Amari, her brother goes missing, and she's in a position at school where she's on scholarship at the private school, bullied, made fun of, gets in trouble for whenever she does kind of push back against the bullies. Privileged, snotty white kids are just so incredibly mean to her. But she's determined to find out what happened to her brother. That leads her on this quest into the supernatural world, which she was not aware existed. But now she is able to be a part of it. Her mom thinks she's at some special leadership summer camp, but she's actually in this training school for supernatural beings. And there's this whole school environment as well. Her situation there tends to parallel what's happening in her school life at home as well. But her brother was kind of a genius and super famous in this supernatural world for some of the things that he was able to accomplish. And Amari, as she learns more and more about her brother and gets deeper involved with what's going on in this supernatural world. So we go on Amari's adventure along with her as she learns about this supernatural part of the world. I thought it was clever and creative and very compelling. I loved Amari and her determination to find out what happened to her brother. I'm very excited to read more on in this series. I just loved this. I thought it was fabulous. Maybe I was in a fantasy mood, but this is now my favorite of the month, and I'm really so glad that I read it. Many of you could be glad too, because this was highly recommended to me this year on my recommendations cart. So I knocked it out. It's done. I read it, and it's a gorgeous cover. Very excited that I got to read that one. So yay for Amari. Yay for middle grade March. Yay for 12 books read already. Really, that's kind of remarkable. I'm glad that I don't save them all until the very end of the month to talk about, because holy moly, that would be a lot of books. So here are the 11 plus the FixerUpper that I've read so far this month. I would love to hear if you have read any of these. What did you think about them? If you are adding any of them to your TBR now that you've heard me talk about them. And how has your month been going? What has been your favorite read so far this March? Be it middle grade or not, I'm totally fine to hear some that are not middle grade, but I would love to hear from you. What have you been enjoying reading this month? And thank you so much for watching. I know this one is a little bit longer because I had a lot of books to talk about, and hopefully I'll have 1 or 2 more of these before the end of the month. So many good books coming my way. I'm very excited. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you so much, and I look forward to talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.